Good afternoon. My name is Michael Brooks. I am a co-chair along with Binky Lush to put together the accessibility track for this web conference. The presentation you're about to see is Know Your Role, Building in Accessibility Throughout Your Project's Lifecycle, and a few housekeeping reminders. Turn off any cell phones or set them to vibrate. Also, please fill out the evaluation for this session. And this session, I believe, is A11. So if you use that session code, I am pleased to present Angela Hooker to do this presentation for you. And I expect some really great information out of this. So, Angela.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I am thrilled to be talking about how we build in accessibility in our projects where I work. I work as a contractor for a federal government agency, so it's very interesting, let me tell you, and it presents a lot of different challenges. So just before we get started, if you all like to tweet, you can use the hashtag role-based Alley, A11Y, and my Twitter handle is Access for All. So let's get started. One thing I want you all to think about, and we'll come back to at the end, is what do you all find is the most challenging part of building in accessibility in your projects? So think about that, and at the end we'll talk about that. So in the meantime, I want to introduce you to my fabulous team that I'm so glad to be a part of. We're fairly small in some cases. Sometimes we add people to our team as the projects dictate. It's never always the same group of people working on things, but we usually have a core group of people that we work with, and I have a feeling that some of you have seen them before even. Now I hope you like art. Does anyone in here like fine art? Okay, a few of you. Well, good, because I'm good at bad art. So maybe you all will like my bad art here. So these are our back-end developers. Do you recognize them? Like I said, this is my bad art. This is Kaylee, and this is Wash. Maybe you all have seen them before, and I'm not sure where, but. Then we have a front-end developer. His name is Jane. He's kind of out there, a maverick, roll with the punches, taking care of business kind of guy. And we like that in our developers. Then we have the beautiful Inara, who is our designer, and she always comes up with the most fascinating designs, and they happen to be very usable. So we like having her around. And this is Simon, our usability specialist. He often tells us how to fix things so people can use our projects much better. And this is our content lead, River. Now the thing about River, she's a little high-strung, shall we say. But every once in a while, she writes something that's particularly profound, and we're like, wow, where did that come from? We just have to keep her in line. Simon's good at that. And this is Zoe, our project manager. Now, I have to tell you, I really wanted to be Zoe, but I realized that wasn't true. That just wasn't true. But she is a really fabulous, taking care of business kind of person. And she really knows how to round us up and get things going. And then we have Mal, our senior manager. And everybody loves Mal, except maybe Jane, but you know, they'll work out their issues. But can we just look at Mal for a second there? Yeah, that's good. I love Mal. And then, oh, wait, I went too fast. Where do you think I fit in this? Well, you all kind of saw it. I kind of gave it away. I'm always trying to be the shepherd. So I would like to say that I'm really like Shepherd Book, but in reality, sometimes I come across as a pistol packing Jules. A mushroom cloud laying somebody. That's me, but I'm working on it. So we have a great team of people. We work together very well. And it didn't start out that way. My job was open-ended, so I wasn't sure everything that I was going to be doing. So they said, well, basically, you're going to be working on making sure that we're following web best practices, that we're following the necessary standards, that we're meeting all the requirements that we're bound to by law. And like I said, we're a federal agency, so we are held to Section 508. However, that doesn't always work for us. My other part of my job is to teach best practices. And our scope now, even though then it was a bit different, we have several main websites, we have microsites, we have other new media projects, we have apps, APIs, and the like. So I knew when I came in there, it was going to be really interesting. But at the time, we only had one main site, and then it grew to 2. So I'm our team's shepherd, sort of. I knew that when I came on board that I had to create a process that everyone could be comfortable with, where everyone felt like they were heard, where it was very participatory. So no one felt like they were drowned out or that they couldn't speak up and make their needs known, make their suggestions known, and have their skills and abilities appreciated. So at that time, we didn't have a CMS. Like I said, we were a very small site, and we probably had less than 100 pages. So Jane, our developer, was able to update the site twice a week, people, twice a week. Twice a week, hear that. Now think about that. That was back in 2001, I believe. Now imagine only updating your site twice a week now. Things were very different. So we put together a process and everyone was happy. We were in love. We were like, this is great. We're going to do some wonderful things. We're going to teach the federal web community and other government agencies that aren't at the federal level how to do this, and we should share our knowledge. And everything went well for a while. But suddenly we grew, and it just got to the point where it was ridiculous. We had requests coming in at an alarming rate, and we just weren't prepared to keep up with them. We didn't have enough staff. Our team was much smaller then, and instead of being able to borrow people, we still had to make do with what we had. And unfortunately, that meant that we had to compromise along the way. And that was one of our first mistakes, because we were trying to do so much. Not only did our accessibility suffer, but our general usability suffered. We wanted to be everything to everyone. And it just was bad news. So we ended up, again, with projects that were inaccessible, and it just didn't work for anyone. So suddenly I was thinking, oh boy, I've got to figure out how we're going to fix these things. And we said, okay, if we get this done, we can go back later on and fix things. But despite our intentions, we just never had time because there was always something happening. There was always a project coming down the pike. So we just never went back. And I said, wait a second now, okay, we shouldn't be doing it like this. If we're going to launch a project, we need to have accessibility thought of at each project's inception. And so they listened, they agreed for the most part. And sometimes they didn't. And when they didn't, we had some disastrous results. So one day, the unthinkable happened. Our friend Jane sort of sent me a rocket. Now, if you know me, there's a couple of things you know about me. A, I don't like to be called Angie. And B, I am not a morning person. So let me share this true story, and I love to tell this story. So the phone rings, but it's drowned out by Angela's sweet snoring. Hi, Angela, it's Jane. Or maybe I should make my voice gruff. Hi, Angela, it's Jane. Look, I'm sorry to call you so early in the morning. I didn't even think I'd be up at 6 a.m., but that's how I roll. And then awkward silence. So, yeah, we just wrapped up the banking apps last night. But wait a second, I forgot to tell you that we were working on these apps. Well, anyway, I just wanted to give you a shout out so you could finish your testing by 11 this morning. And by noon, we can fix any of those crazy issues that you always find. And that means that we can launch the apps by about 1, and then we'll give the press office the word. So give me a call when you're coherent, and I'll send you the test server login. Thanks, Angela. Oh, and the sooner you can get that report to me, the better. I told Mal, my supervisor, about this, so he's expecting that report too. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, thanks a lot. He threw me under the bus. So later, Angie. Oh my gosh. When I woke up eventually, I was livid. I said, that Goram, So we actually survived. We got through that project, but it wasn't pretty. And it still continued where people were forgetting to even think about accessibility at the beginning, despite my telling them, despite pleading, despite begging. All they thought of as accessibility was, okay, at the end we just need to test it. And that's all it was to them. So because we were doing so much, it even got to the point where I didn't even know about projects. And I said, we're too small for this. We need to be talking more. So as time went on, it just so happened that we had all these urgent projects. We had poor planning by Zoe and other project managers. We had lots of politics because, you know, even outside of government, you deal with politics every day, power plays. We were constrained by some of the technologies that we chose. And then some people just didn't understand about accessibility, and some people didn't even care. And again, even though we were bound by Section 508, some people just didn't want to follow any type of standards. So I realized we needed another approach and we needed another perspective. And I started thinking, well, maybe we can borrow people and create a team from everyone we already have on staff. And I knew that I was going to have to talk to management because without their buy-in, this would never take off ground, what I was about to propose. So I knew that there were some things that I wanted to negotiate, and I knew that there were some things that I would have to be willing to lose. And so I went to management, and I had data, reasoning, statistics, everything that I knew I could disarm them with. And I encourage you actually to take a second here, when you have a moment, look at Carol Smith's slide share presentation on negotiating for the user. And she has some fabulous information on how to deal with your teammates and to get what you need. And it's very practical information that you can actually apply to your personal life. So I knew I had a long list of needs. I needed their support. I had to have freedom to do my job. I didn't need anyone saying, Angela, no, 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 you can't do this. I needed management to commit to accessibility. I needed them to understand that it was a priority, because people are happy to sue, and they're happy to make a ruckus and complain. They're happy to do whatever it takes to get accessibility on the map in any organization. So I also needed them to realize that there couldn't just be me as the accessibility champion. I needed help because we were drowning. And I still needed them to understand that I wasn't going to waste time or money. And I wanted them to know that I was capable of training the entire team. And I wanted them to stop thinking of accessibility as something that's only considered by developers, or that you only address in the development process, because it covers so much more than that. So I wanted them to give me the authority to make decisions about what we needed to do to be accessible, and I could advise the entire team. And more than anything, I needed management to create an atmosphere where everyone felt comfortable talking about problems and issues and what we needed to overcome them. I needed them to feel empowered so we could actually do something and not just sit and talk about it behind management's back, but talk about it with management so that we could get the resources we needed. So I figured that it would make sense to share the work for accessibility based on roles, instead of me coming along at the end or somewhere in the process and correcting their work. Suddenly, each team member was going to be held accountable for the quality of their work, plus the types of things that they checked when they produced their work. So I no longer had to say to people, okay, your code is terrible, your code sucks, let's fix that. And I didn't have to babysit people who were choosing the platform and say, this platform isn't accessible, it's not going to work for us, and you have to choose another, after they had invested all this time in this product. And then to the designers, well, you know, the structure you set up and the colors you chose don't have sufficient contrast. You've got to change them. So instead of me hounding them, they were able to do it. And then to the content managers, this content doesn't really help our users. How can we make it compelling? How can we write it in the active voice so that people feel like they're engaged? And then I didn't have to say to anyone in quality assurance, this, you know, you said you tested this, but it's inaccurate because I'm getting these errors here. We need to go through this again. Perhaps we're not looking at the same standards and guidelines. So everyone was going to be accountable. Everyone, including management, for their support. So what I decided that we needed was to take 4 key steps toward making things accessible, making all of our sites, our apps, our microsites, our APIs, anything that was web or computer-based that we did, anything that we even sent out in print, anything that we were delivering to the public. we had to have 4 key things. We needed understanding, we needed training, we needed standards, and we needed tools. Because up until then, it was the shepherd. So first of all, people needed to understand disabilities. And they needed to know how each disability type impacts the person who has it. Because I realized no one had actually sat down and explained to people what the issues were and the problems that people were having with using our products. They had no idea. They were mostly focused on screen reader, screen reader, screen reader. But as you know, that just doesn't cut it. So they also needed to understand that if we were doing things for accessibility, it was going to lend itself to having products that we could use on any device. And that's when people perked up, because they said, we can make this work on mobile. We can do this. We can do that. So they got excited then. And then I decided that we needed to train people according to their roles. Some of the people that we had varying skill sets. Some of the people we knew for a long time. So we knew what their skills were. As far as our developers, we knew what they could do. We knew that we had some people who would be contributing design who weren't quite as skilled as our Inara. So we wanted to make sure that everybody was coming from the same place. So I knew I wanted to train them myself so that there would be no arguments about what is accessible and what does it mean. And we're not hashing out a whole bunch of philosophies so that everyone had the same understanding. So we didn't want anyone to feel ashamed even about their lack of skill or if they hadn't kept their skills up to date. We wanted to make everyone comfortable and say, listen, we're together in this. We're going to work on this together and train you. So I knew that I needed to teach them that we have to test and plan through every step of every project. And it didn't just mean that I, the shepherd, had to test everything, but they should be testing their own work. And they had to learn how to choose accessible platforms and technologies. And we had to learn, well, you just can't do what the cool kids are doing just for the sake of doing something shiny and new. We had to really see if technology or a new thing was going to work for us, because if it didn't matter if our users didn't want to use it just because everyone else was doing it. Well, people come to us for different reasons than they do to your average site. And I'm sure that's true at the university level. They're coming to us for specific government information and to complete tasks. And that's true at universities. They don't necessarily want all the gadgets and gizmos and shebangs that you get on your average site. So we had to teach our developers to produce good, clean code, and that it wasn't about getting it done fast, it had to be done right. And believe it or not, there were some developers who still were not validating their own code. So they had to be taught that. And then we taught accessible design principles. And that was really interesting because people didn't want to have a particular structure because they didn't want to be constrained by certain things. But I told them that if we were going to use consistent navigation and structure as far as headings and keeping the flow consistent and familiar, that people were going to want to use this. Again, with the usability edge, they perked up. And so The content managers also needed to understand that people who have low English proficiency, or people with dyslexia or cognitive impairments, they need plain language and even actually other standards and other principles to guide them along. And I also taught them that we needed to conduct our usability testing with people with disabilities. And that was something that they had never done until that time. So suddenly they were open. And then they also needed to learn how people with disabilities use their assistive technologies. They were not familiar with that. And again, only some of them had seen JAWS, they had heard it. They figured that if you listen to the entire page, well, if it reads it, it's accessible. But they didn't realize that that's not how people navigate using screen readers. So it was a very eye-opening experience. Then we went to the standards step. We needed to divide up the standards into reasonable chunks for everyone. Now, this was years before WCAG 2.0, and WCAG 1.0 was out there. But we were held to Section 508, but the way I got us to start using other best practices was to share with them how people with disabilities were unable to use things even if we were following the checklist, even if everything looked great against the checklist. If it didn't work with assistive technology, it didn't matter because it was unusable. And so that wasn't accessibility to me. So then I gave them tools. I gave them some of the same tools that I was testing with. The first time people looked at Wave or Ramp, I think back then, or some of the other toolbars like the Paciello Group toolbar. It was eye-opening for them because they were able to see where they could catch things before they sent it along. And this was the great part about them taking responsibility. It was no longer pushed aside to someone else, namely me, to clean it up. So the tools varied by their role. And what we also did was we created checklists to guide them along, just so that they would know what to check. And we also gave them custom tools, like a sheet with information about color schemes that we knew were accessible because we were using standard color schemes. Sometimes people wanted to deviate from that, so we had to have style guides and things like that. And then we also had things like code libraries. Now, one of the things was that we began to see that a lot of the roles overlapped. Some people were doing things, they said, well, this doesn't make sense for me to do it because you're the designer or you're the developer, so why should I be looking at this? But with the scope of our projects and the number of projects that we had, it made sense that the roles overlapped. Everybody had to take on a bit of something else to get the job done. And nobody was handling one set of tasks. Now, back then we didn't have this, but let me share with you the Government of Canada's excellent resource. It's called the Accessibility Responsibility Breakdown, and it's actually on GitHub, and you can download it. But what it does, it breaks down every part of the web content accessibility guidelines by role. So for your project manager, or for the information architect, or the person handling the design, and the interactive design, and the development, and everything else you can imagine, it's in there. So check that out and definitely put that to use, because that's going to take care of most of the work for you right there. Now, it didn't all happen overnight. Things were not shiny. things were not going great. It was a rough process. We had to make sure that we iterated our process. We had to streamline it where necessary, according to the project and according to the standards that we needed. And we had to keep working at it until we were left with something that made us really productive. And as we got to know each other, the larger team that we drew in to work with us, as we got to know each other better, we could trust them. We could trust in their abilities because we knew we all had the same type of training and we were coming from the same viewpoint. So it made it so much easier. So the more we did it and the more we were willing to be flexible with our process, the more we were able to do this. Now, we also found out what didn't work. Now, I've already told you that it didn't work to have me doing all the testing. And it also didn't work to not have every team member trained in accessibility. So anybody who comes on board has to be trained in accessibility. It also didn't help us to put the work before our relationships. Now, we're kind of a unique bunch. We actually like each other. We like working with one another. So we had to build that rapport with every new person that came on board. And we had to make them understand that we were going to be supportive of them and their strengths and train them where they weren't so strong. So that was probably a key place for us to make a difference in the rapport and turning the tide as far as being comfortable working with new people and working with people from other departments whom we'd never seen before. So the other thing that we found out didn't work for us was having upper management who was disinterested. They had to be just as excited about accessibility as we were. If they didn't support it, then people we were drawing in from other teams, they wouldn't care about it. So unless they knew, oh yes, management is behind this 100%, then they just didn't care themselves. We also, again, had to realize that our process was going to evolve, and it continues to evolve to this day. It's never the same, I can say that. We may use the same standards, we may draw from different standards depending on the project, but the process always evolves. And then the other thing was, we had to realize that our accessibility program could not be personality driven. And I'm not sure what it says about me, but my team members tell me, oh, I talked to Wash the other day, and I told him, oh, Angela's not going to be happy about this. Have you talked with her yet? Well, it's really not about what Angela thinks. It's about what's usable for the people who come to our sites and who want to use our products. It can't be about me. And it can't be about any of you. The thing is, though, if you find that you have favor and pull with people, you want to use your powers for good, because sometimes you'll be able to sneak some things in there, not in a bad way, but just to get people to stop and listen to you and be willing to understand. So know when to use that. Now, what did we gain from this? Well, we saved a whole lot of money because we weren't waiting until after we had chosen our technologies, after we had chosen our platforms, after everything was built. We knew then if we were going to be working with a vendor from the outside that we weren't going to be working with a technology that they were unwilling to make accessible, that they were not willing to give up some of the control over their proprietary works. They had to be willing to work with us. So we saved a lot of money by not waiting until the last minute. We also had a solid process to fight the thought that accessibility is time consuming. Well, if you're doing it throughout the process, it's not going to be time consuming at the end. It's not going to be weeks for testing and reviewing several sites. It's not going to be something that's going to be take a long time and waste your time while I'm checking and testing and you're twiddling your thumbs wanting to get this product out there. And then we found out suddenly what we're doing is working. This is really good. This is really good. This is the way to go. So we just wrapped up our second responsive design project, and we're really excited about that. This time, we had to do our usability testing differently. So I want to tell you again, be willing to adapt, because we realized, well, we can't have every device in the book out there and have people with disabilities come in like we normally do into our labs and conduct sessions there. We had to come up with a new process so that they could test using their tools in their environment so they were comfortable with their devices, and it's turning out really well just because we were willing to adapt. So since then, my role really is the shepherd. I really am the shepherd now, and I'm not trying to be the shepherd. I'm not Jules with my big bad pistol out there. I am the shepherd. And I learned myself that if people see you as the accessibility person, that they fully expect for you to be the expert and understand everything about accessibility. And even if you don't, you have to be willing to go out there and get the information for them. They're going to see you as the expert, and they want even expert help on products that you may not support or understand yourself. And I also learned that I had to sometimes be a counselor, an evangelist, an educator, and a maverick. But we got it done. So back to you all. What are your challenges with accessibility? Where do you all have difficulty refining your process and building it into your projects? Yes.
Elaborate a little more on when you said your department came up with a responsive design of the site. How at different stages of the project you introduced accessibility, and up to what extent, and who was the person in charge? Like what role, and like in detail.
Okay, now if I tell that in detail, let me repeat the question. She's asking how we built in accessibility into our responsive design projects. But the key thing to remember is that responsive design, you're still doing the same thing that you would be doing for your website. So we have the entire team that we normally have involved working on that. We have our project managers. We have our content specialists. We have our designers, our developers, our back-end people who are working on the CMS. We have our usability specialist. And then we have me. So the same cast of characters doing the same type of work, using the same standards, plus the mobile accessibility guidelines that the W3C has put out. And I don't know if any of you all saw Glenda's presentation yesterday about mobile, but she was talking about Henny Swan from the BBC. And they are about to release some excellent information on mobile. And I would encourage you when it's available to look at that, because you'll also want to consider guidelines specific to the operating system, like Android and iOS. and you'll be able to do some things for accessibility in that respect. So it will be at your code level, but it will also be at the design level where you're making sure that your labels for items are above a form input, or that you've coded the input properly. So it's things like that. It's still the same process, the same people, but probably a larger group of guidelines. Does that answer? What were you looking for?
I mean, like at the beginning of the process, who you have it. I mean, you know, if you have a project and you break it down at the beginning, whose input do you really seek? The designers or the content lead? Or at what point you need, I guess, at the beginning of the process? And do you give them a specific sheet, like what roles is expected? What is the expectation from the designers or for the content roles?
We're using some of the tools and cheat sheets that I was telling you about, so that they're choosing good colors. And it's particularly important on mobile to choose really good contrast with colors, probably even more so than on a desktop because of the screen itself not being well lit. So it's things like that that you have to keep in mind. But everybody is coming together at the beginning to discuss those things. And we talk about what the best practices are at the beginning. We're not waiting until we're well into the process. We're starting at the beginning to choose the standards and the guidelines that we're going to use. Does that make sense? Okay. Anyone else have anything you want to share? What impact does your student body have on your accessibility? Are you considering that there are more older students now and they have different needs? Are you considering your current student body, people who have disabilities or people who aren't native English speakers? How can that impact your choices for accessibility?
One of the ways for people who are not a native English speaker, you have to be cognizant that JAWS may not work for them. JAWS does not work for Japanese. So if they're trying to read the page in Japanese, you're sunk if you're relying on JAWS for testing.
That's true. That's true. So what do you do for someone who's not a native English speaker and perhaps needs a screen reader? Do you provide some sort of accommodation or?
At this point, no. We're trying to figure out what type of recommendation. It's typically been JAWS is what we've standardized on. And we just recently found out that that's a problem. We have a campus in Japan. So that's an issue.
Wow. Okay. Yes.
Just to add to that, we did have a visiting scholar who is a JAWS user, but she was from Russia or Ukraine. But her JAWS had the correct language pack, so her JAWS could process content in English or Russian. So I
Okay.
think if I were in your situation, I would contact Freedom Scientific or someone in Japan to see what their standard screen reader setup is, and work around that, especially for your Japanese language pages. So it's true the U.S. version of JAWS probably can't process Japanese, but in Japan there probably is a screen reader that will be able to process Japanese and probably also be able to process English.
Thank you for sharing that. Now I know.
You want me to paraphrase that just a tad for the?
Oh, I'm sorry. She was saying that you could contact Freedom Scientific to get information on how to set up JAWS for another language, and that there are language packs that you can use for the screen reader. So it may not read what you're doing on your site without that, but you can set it up so that it will. Yes.
I would suggest trying NVDA too, because they have a lot of languages too with their screen reader. And it's the free access screen reader. So depending on your web content, a lot more people could have access to it because you can download that for free.
Are you all using NVDA and Firefox? No. You are? Anyone else? Well, there's a great resource. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
I'll throw it out there since I'm talking about this. I feel like the tide is turning, like the latest mobile survey has JAWS down to basically about half of the users. With VoiceOver and NVDA and others picking up the slack. And it used to be that when we would talk about accessibility, we'd be like, oh, it's got to work in JAWS. But now we're to the place where it's got to work across a bunch of things.
That's right.
There are a lot of variables, that, including language support and all in this, that we can't say that JAWS is the gold standard for
That's right.
even more cloud extenders.
Matt was saying that we need to make sure that we're not just relying on JAWS and thinking that it's the end-all be-all as far as screen readers on the web, that because of mobile and people using VoiceOver and other tools, that we have to consider that too. And then I also want to say, and I probably forgot to mention this earlier, that sometimes people test with one type of assistive technology and they think that that means blanket accessibility, but it does not. And those are the types of things that you'll want to consider in your process. And that accessibility breakdown that I shared with you from the Canadian government, that has things that you can test to a particular standard. So you'll be hitting keyboard and non-mouse users. So.
To wrap up, sorry to cut the question short. We can take questions offline after this to wrap up the next.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. So I have some resources at the very end of this. I want you to be encouraged to bridge the gap between you and the rest of your team and your philosophies. Make sure that you're coming from the same place. And that comes through training and using that 4-step process. So, I also want to point out that, remember, Jane was not annoying because he didn't understand accessibility. And we have to be willing to explain that. He was annoying because he called me Angie and he called me at 6 in the morning. So, resources at the very back of my slides. My slides will be online at SlideShare under Access for All and on my website, angelahooker.com. So, as you see, there's something for everyone involved in every part of the process. And have at it. And if you have questions, feel free to send them to me. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.